Sea to escalating conflicts, it's been yet another eventful week across North Africa. Former South African President Jacob Zuma has reportedly made a surprise pitch to Morocco on matters ranging from education to land reform. And we go as far as Libya and the EU and Interpol stepping up efforts to combat organized crime and manage migration, even as Egypt faces growing backlash over its stance on Gaza. So, helping us to unpack these developments, we're now joined by journalist and author Shafiq Morton. Shafiq, always good to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Morning, Peter. I hope it's all good your side.
Yes, yeah, we soldier on, we soldier on. Jacob Zuma, very interesting developments there. He spends his entire political career in the ANC with the Polisario Front supporting them, and then all of a sudden he's pro-Morocco. What do you make of this pitch to Morocco?
Yeah, Peter, this is an interesting one indeed, because to me it seems to be a symptom of the greater malaise. The fact that Zuma is still bitter about his dismissal, we all know about that. And the fact that he still sees himself as a victim and still thinks he is not accountable, which were the hallmarks of his presidency. We know all of those things. The violation of diplomatic protocol here, and some people would even call it a diplomatic sort of treason, in fact, is very interesting. And to me, it seems to be a deliberate sort of a barb against the ANC's policy on the Polisario Front on Western Sahara. It's absolutely surprising to see that turnaround. And it's not just that. It's not just the defiance of Durko's diplomatic protocols. It's the fact that he goes to a country like Morocco, which is not wealthy, and there he is suggesting the creation of an intelligence college and a unit or an entity that trains security officials. It's absolutely and utterly bizarre, that particular suggestion. And one just wonders what on earth he was actually doing in Morocco, because I don't know about you, Peter, but I'm still scratching my head.
One gets a sense, and I don't know, maybe you can help us here. It's the principles don't matter. It's more about the effect. It sounds like an agent provocateur.
Yes, that's exactly. I think President or former President Zuma has got to the stage where he is so desperate to prove his point, and he's so consumed with the indignity of having been removed from office that he sees President Cyril Ramaphosa, as a mortal enemy. And anybody who supports Ramaphosa to him is fair game. But crazy to go all the way to Morocco just to do that. It really does beggars belief.
Okay, still with Morocco, we see now that Portugal has now publicly endorsed Morocco's autonomy plan for Western Sahara. Is this significant? What does this mean in the wider international context, do you think?
This is significant because Morocco for some time has been trying to sell a deal on Western Sahara in terms of what we would call an autonomous initiative. And part of this is obviously getting a number of European countries to buy into it. The United States has agreed, Spain, Germany, Britain, and now Portugal. And what is interesting here is that for more than 50 years, Morocco has denied the Sahrawi people a referendum on their future. That's what they've essentially been asking for via organizations such as the Polisario Front. So that hasn't happened in a period of 50 years. So we've got a deal here where you'll find Morocco is suggesting that it is in charge of security, defense, territorial integrity, and even its flag and anthem. And what the Sahrawis or the West Saharans will get is local policing, a regional budget, and a bit of taxation, economic development, social welfare, infrastructure, and foreign affairs. So it sounds very much to me like an old-fashioned homeland. I mean, you give an autonomy, but you can't even have your own flag. And I cannot see the Polisario Front or the activists in the Western Sahara being very happy for this being foisted upon them. And it's also interesting to see that Morocco has been going to Europe for help on this, not African countries. There doesn't seem to be any stirrings in the AU on this at all. And I also find that interesting. But at the bottom of it, I think, is the old-fashioned scenario of money. Western Sahara is very rich in phosphates, for example, which Europe can use it for its agriculture, for example.
Okay, let's go to Libya. Interpol and Libyan forces have launched a joint operation in Misrata under Operation Neptune. What do we understand about the objective here? How does this fit into broader regional or EU efforts to combat organized crime and manage migration, maybe?
Yeah, managed migration, I think, Peter, is the key term. You've put your finger on the button there. This is a kind of a story you've got to read in between the lines, because this is not the first such initiative. I think there have been 6 before, if I read it correctly. Misrata was the city where this Interpol initiative was aimed, and Misrata sits between Tripoli in the west and Benghazi in the east. And Misrata is the third biggest city. Misrata is an interesting place because it's got its own military, so it's not quite part of any of the factions, although they do lean towards Khalifa Haftar, who basically has control over the east of the country, because Libya divided into 2 political factions. And basically, I think Misrata has been used for human trafficking. And there have been stories of one of Libya's top human traffickers arrested there in a previous raid. And I think this plays into Europe's very unwelcoming attitude towards African migrants going across the ocean to Europe to look for work.
Okay, in Egypt, there are reports that the government pressured the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar to withdraw a statement condemning Israel's siege of Gaza. How unusual is this? And what does it tell us about the balancing act that Egypt is trying to play in the region?
That's exactly what it is. It is a balancing act. It's very unusual for the Mufti of the Al-Azhar, and this was Sheikh Ahmed Al-Tayyib, making a public statement in favor of supporting the Palestinians and condemning the ongoing genocide. And he makes a statement, and it's taken out of public circulation very quickly afterwards by what we would call the deep state in Egypt, which is the military, which is under the control of General Sisi, who is the Egyptian president at the moment. And there's 2 options. I'm beginning to wonder whether this could have been a deliberate leak, that the military allowed this to sort of get into the public space and then shut it down, or the Mufti kind of overstepped the mark, as it were. But he was certainly reflecting the feelings of Egyptians in the streets about what is happening in Gaza. I mean, the Arab world is in a turmoil in the streets because of what's happening in Gaza, and the Arab street does not always necessarily represent the way that the leaders think. There's another factor that goes in here, and that is that certain countries are hugely reliant upon the US for the economic well-being, I'll put it that way. Israel is one, Egypt is one, Jordan is one, and Ethiopia is another one. So whether Egypt was protecting its interests or not, or just trying to kick against the bin, it's an open question, basically.
Will it become easier for Egypt and to manage this balancing act? Because we are seeing more and more of Israel's traditional allies calling out Israel.
Very true, and I'm wondering whether Egypt is testing the waters as far as this is concerned. I mean, you know, take away the fact that Sisi is not a popular leader in Egypt. The fact is that Egypt sits in a very difficult situation because they have Gaza as a border, and they have not opened the border, and nor is Egypt prepared to accept a flood of refugees from Gaza, knowing full well that Israel will never allow them back. And this goes back to the 1960s, actually, the dilemma that Egypt sits with in terms of people in Gaza. And Gaza is basically a refugee camp, or was a refugee camp until it got bombed back into the Stone Age. So yes, Egypt perhaps trying to see how far they can push their dislike of what they have to deal with.
At the same time, Tunisia's president made headlines by confronting a U.S. envoy with a photo of a starving child in Gaza. How is Tunisia positioning itself in the wider Arab response to Gaza? And what kind of message was intended to send here?
I think Tunisia was the president here was extremely clever the way he did things. Tunisia hasn't exactly been loud on the question of Gaza, but we know that in the streets of Tunis and in the fields, as it were, that Tunisians, North Africans, have been as equally concerned about what's happening in Gaza as anybody else. It's the political leadership which always seems to be behind. But in this case, Kais Saied, the president, very cleverly in front of the cameras, shows the U.S. senior advisor, Mossad Boulos, this picture, and he says, and these words I think were ringing around the Arab world, "I believe you've seen these before." And I think that phrase is going to become quite a stock phrase in terms of the situation. And it's an ironic reversal of a Trump tactic, where Trump specializes in humiliating foreign leaders who visit the White House, such as President Cyril Ramaphosa, recently the president of Liberia, who was congratulated on his English, despite the fact it was his home language. Yeah. And so I think this, to sort of just to pare it down, was a classic up yours to the American advisor. And when you look at the footage, you can see that he was really struggling to keep his posture in terms of what the Tunisian president did to him. And I think everybody will say, good on you, mate. We need more of that.
Is there anything else you think we should be paying attention to in the North Africa region at this time?
I think, Peter, that Egypt is a country to look at, because one of the statements that came out when it shut down Sheikh Ahmed Tayyip's statement about Gaza, it said, listen, we are in a very delicate or sensitive, we are following a sensitive diplomatic path to parse the words that were used by Egypt. So is there a development in terms of what's happening in Gaza, what's going to be happening? It does seem as if Egypt now is perhaps working very hard behind the scenes together with countries like Qatar to see whether a peace can be achieved in Gaza. I don't know. But, sometimes when we look at these things, we have to sort of try and read the signs or the tea leaves, as they say in the classics.
Yeah, I mean, the Middle East, it is a real focal point in terms of how the West and Africa and other countries deal with it. From your perspective, where is it going? Because what's happening is unsustainable, but we've had unsustainable moments in the past. But there's something different about this time around, I get a sense.
Exactly. I think what is hugely significant, number one, has been the social media barrage of people just being decent, actually, and asking questions of what Israel has been doing to the Gazans. I have never seen as many people now informed about the Palestinian question as I do today. So that's the positive thing. Gen Z, Gen Alpha, all these people who are active on social media are very tuned into it. We're also seeing cracks in the edifice, as it were. I think the fact that Trump is president now is hugely significant because he's unpredictable. And that really does make it interesting in a very nervous kind of sense. And I think Israel is at a very delicate point because just before October the 7th, Israel was basically at war with itself. It was almost at a stage of civil war on a number of various issues. And I'm beginning to wonder how much more time Netanyahu has, because he faces some major corruption charges. And sooner than later, Mr. Netanyahu might be wearing that classic orange uniform in an Israeli prison.
Yeah, and maybe Donald Trump will visit him. We'll leave it there,
Who knows?
Shafiq. Thanks so
All
much.
right.
Always good talking to you, my brother. Take it easy.
All the best.
Thank you. That's Shafiq Morton, a journalist and author, speaking to us about matters North Africa. It's 6:30, which means it's